So we live in this cycle of life, death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth. So it's all this transition. If you look at um, religions, for instance, they look at history from a linear perspective, and it's a start to a finish, versus the chthonic traditions were more of a circular or a recycling, or again, this rebirthing. And we're all familiar with the Lion King and the circle of life, but it's that nature. So personal resurrection, universal resurrection is what I'm talking about. And we may be living in a resurrection of sorts with what is going on with COVID-19. There's a lot of rethinking about how we're doing things. We are all in transition and on a journey, and what you are today is not what you will be next year or in 10 years, or maybe in the next week. So the resurrection became, for me, something metaphorical and not literal, which I believe is the intention, and not a concept to be discarded. It took me looking at myself very hard before I could get beyond my issues with organized religion. And in 12 steps, we were told that we can choose our own concept of a higher power, which has been just a life-saving grace for me. So I began to discover ways to look at so many so-called religious concepts and form my own ideas. Now, many of you know that I'm involved in end-of-life care, and transitioning or being born to something else in death is, I believe, something that I've been in tune with since I've been involved in hospice care earlier on in my career, now palliative medicine. I know we're all familiar with Charon or Charon. I wasn't very good at phonics, but in Greek mythology, Charon was the ferryman, and he would carry folks over the river Styx into Hades. And I've seen in my own career, and I've seen death, and I know that many of you have seen death up close. But for me, I've seen the transition of death, and I do use the word death, not as a finality, but I think it's something that we all have to face, and that's our mortality. But there is something maybe immortal, and that might be the spirit, the soul. Those are questions I can't answer, but those are things that I do believe. So to me, death is a ritual, like birth, like marriage, like many things that we experience. It's a ritual, and I think it's something that we should celebrate. I've also seen people choose the option of dying. I've been with people who have chosen the end of life option, which is something here in California and many other states, particularly Oregon, or death with dignity. So I've been with many people at that last moment, some who did not choose and some who did choose. And when you see these people in those moments, it certainly is a privilege to be there and to bear witness. There's a song by a band called Amulet, and this is a band back in the 1980s that came out of Evansville, Indiana, which is where Peggy and I are from. And there was a song that I really, really liked, and I'll do my best to sing it for you if I could, without any music. And it goes like this. Have you ever thought of what becomes of one who dies? Is he really gone, or does he see through different eyes? I'd love to know the answer, yet I don't know why. Can anyone tell me if he's gonna be alright? And so, physical death, to me, is just another step along the path of life. And I suspect Jesus may have thought that, and maybe Jim Morrison did too. After all, he did write the song, Break On Through to the Other Side. Our immortality is not linked to our physical self, which is what I believe or at least my interpretation of what Ernest Holmes was talking about in that first reading. So, in summary, I'd like to read a few things, and another section that I got from the complete works of Ernest Holmes, which is from Romans 8:11. It's on page 639, and it's called "The Spirit That Raised Jesus." That's what Ernest Holmes titled it. The Spirit that raised Jesus dwells in all. This Spirit quickens our mortal bodies when we let it. Here is a lesson in mental and spiritual healing. As the truth dawns upon the subjective state of our thought, it stimulates it into newness of action. Everything works from within out. The body is a reflection of the soul, and when the soul, which is the subjective state of thought, is illumined by the Spirit, it quickens the mortal part of us and heals the body. The mortal is always an effect, a creature of time, but a necessary one, for without it, we could not function as objective individuals. So what I've always thought is the Spirit of Jesus does live. The principles of Jesus, the parables, all those things that Jesus spoke about lives. Again, loving thy neighbor, things like that. Those are, I think, traditions in the Spirit of Jesus that lives within each of us. Death of itself can be a resurrection, a new beginning. And again, it could be that reflection of the St. Francis prayer about dying to self and experiencing eternal life. We all have been resurrected in some fashion. And it's our mission to spread the gospel, or what the gospel means is good news. So it's our job to spread the good news. So maybe Jesus and Jim Morrison have more in common than I thought. Both were mythic poets, makers of songs, individuals that asked us to speak, or to think rather, beyond the walls of physical existence, beyond the doors of perception, as Aldous Huxley would say. This pandemic may signify a resurrection of our planet, our consciousness, and of new thought. I want to end with a poem by David White. And the poem's called Mameen. I heard Mr. White speak at a conference that's very vital to the work that I do. It's the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. And, obviously he understood that we're all in the business of helping people at end of life, through life-limiting conditions and so forth. And so he tailored that talk, and he read a lot of his poems. And one of the poems that he read was Mameen, and I'd like to read it for you. Mameen. Be infinitesimal. Be infinitesimal. Under that sky, a creature, even a sailing hawk, misses. A wraith among the rocks where the mist parts slowly. Recall the way mere mortals are overwhelmed by circumstance. How great reputations dissolve with infirmity, and how you, in particular, stand a hair's breadth from losing everyone you hold dear. Then look back down the path to the north, the way you came, as if seeing your entire past, and then south, over the hazy blue coast, as if present to a broad future. Remember the way you are all possibilities you can see, and how you live best as an appreciator of horizons. As an appreciator of horizons. Wherever you reach them, whether you reach them or not. Admit that once you have got up from your chair and opened the door, once you have walked out into the clean air toward that edge and taken the path up high beyond the ordinary, you have become the privileged and the pilgrim. The privileged and the pilgrim. The one who will tell the story and the one coming back from the mountain who helped to make it. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I hope there's been a few things you can take from this talk. And I send blessings to everyone. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to do this. And I really do appreciate the community of New Thought and embracing me and my wife, Peggy. So, happy Easter and good night.